The massive chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls pulsing with soft blue light that seemed to breathe. Hundreds of alien beings filled the circular space, their forms ranging from towering crystalline structures to writhing masses of tentacles. The air hummed with the sound of 1,000 different languages being translated into common galactic. Dr. Hannah Kim sat in the small section reserved for Earth's delegation, her dark eyes moving slowly across the assembled representatives. She was one of only 3 humans allowed in this sacred space, and at 34, she was by far the youngest person ever to address the Galactic Council. Her simple black suit looked plain and boring compared to the shimmering robes and metallic armor worn by the other delegates. Ambassador Vextel rose from his crystal throne, his forearms spreading wide as holographic images filled the air. Above the chamber, the images showed human military equipment in painful detail, tanks rolling across dusty battlefields, soldiers carrying metal rifles, ships powered by chemical rockets that left trails of fire across the sky. "Look at this primitive technology," Vextel's voice rang out, each word dripping with amusement. His translator made his alien speech sound smooth and musical, but Hannah could hear the mockery underneath. The humans still use kinetic weapons, metal bullets fired by chemical explosives. Their ships burn fossil fuels to escape their own gravity well. Laughter rippled through the chamber. The sound was strange and unsettling, with some aliens making musical chimes while others produced wet, bubbling noises. The Vorthok delegation's tentacles writhed with what Hannah had learned was their version of laughter. Their ambassador, a creature that looked like a giant octopus made of purple flesh, leaned forward on his floating platform. "Chemical propulsion," Commander Zilthak gurgled, his voice thick and wet. "They barely achieved light-speed travel last year. Our children build faster ships in their play workshops." More laughter filled the chamber. Hannah kept her face calm and neutral, but inside she was taking notes. Every reaction, every dismissive comment, every arrogant gesture was being recorded in her memory. She had always been good at remembering details, and right now those details might save her species. The holographic display shifted to show human weapons being tested. Bullets striking metal targets, explosions from chemical bombs, railguns firing, metal slugs at incredible speeds. To the aliens watching, it all looked hopelessly backward. 3,000 years, announced Krell, of the Vorthok Confederacy, his massive form pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. "That is how far behind they are. We were using plasma weapons when their ancestors were still living in caves." Akira, delegate, a being made entirely of living silicon, hummed in agreement. The sound was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but Hannah could hear the condescension in it. "Their energy output is laughable. A single Kiroth harvester ship produces more power than their entire homeworld." Vextel gestured to another set of images. These showed human space stations, looking clunky and industrial compared to the elegant structures built by other species. "Look at their construction methods. Welded metal plates, primitive atmospheric recycling. They cannot even build proper artificial gravity generators." What none of the aliens understood was that humans had never tried to copy their technology. While other species had spent millennia perfecting energy weapons and exotic matter manipulation, humans had taken a completely different path. They had become masters of making simple things work in impossible ways. Hannah thought about the secret research stations hidden throughout the solar system, places where human engineers were studying the alien technology samples that had been secretly acquired over the past decade. Not to copy them, but to understand them. To find ways to make human technology work with alien science in ways that no one had ever imagined. The debate continued for another hour. Representatives from dozens of worlds took turns explaining why humanity posed no threat to the established galactic order. Their weapons were too primitive, their ships too slow, their technology too basic. The consensus was clear and unanimous. Finally, Vextel called for the formal vote. All in favor of classifying the human species as minimal threat level. Hundreds of limbs, tentacles, and energy fields rose in agreement. The vote was unanimous except for 3 abstentions from species that had never heard of Earth before today. "Motion carried," Vextel announced with satisfaction. "The humans will be granted limited trading rights in the outer systems. They may establish mining operations in uncontested asteroid fields. They will pay standard tribute rates to maintain their current colonial holdings." As the session ended and the aliens began filing out of the chamber, many of them continued discussing humanity with the casual indifference reserved for minor nuisances. They talked about humans the way people might discuss a new type of insect that had been discovered in a remote forest. Hannah remained seated until the chamber was nearly empty. Then she stood slowly, smoothing down her plain black suit, and walked toward the exit. Her 2 fellow delegates, both older men from Earth's diplomatic corps, flanked her as they left the Crystal Cathedral. "That went about as expected," muttered Ambassador Jin Sato, the senior human representative. "Better than expected," Hannah replied quietly. "They underestimated us completely." "Is that good or bad?" asked Dr. Min Choi, Earth's chief cultural attaché. Hannah paused at the threshold of the chamber and looked back at the empty space where hundreds of aliens had just dismissed her entire species as harmless primitives. That depends, she said with a small smile, on what we do with the time they just gave us. None of the aliens had bothered to ask the right questions. They had looked at human technology and seen only crude metals and chemical reactions. They had not asked why humans chose kinetic weapons over energy beams. They had not wondered why human ships were built like armored fortresses instead of elegant sculptures. They had not considered that maybe, just maybe, humans had reasons for doing things differently. As the three humans walked through the station's corridors toward their transport ship, Hannah was already planning. The aliens had just made the biggest mistake of their very long lives. They had given humanity exactly what it needed most: time to prepare, and the element of surprise. 18 months had passed since the Galactic Council dismissed humanity. As a minor threat, Dr. Jin Park wiped sweat from his forehead as he stared at the crystalline formation growing from the asteroid's surface. The mining station orbiting Kepler-4 for Tabi was supposed to be a simple operation, extracting rare metals for Earth's expanding space program. Nobody expected to find something that would change everything. Run the scan again? Jin told his assistant, Dr. Yuki Tanaka. The young woman's fingers danced across the control panel, her face lit by the glow of multiple screens showing energy readings that should have been impossible. The crystal was beautiful in a terrifying way. It stood 3 meters tall, its surface shifting between deep purple and brilliant white as energy flowed through its structure like liquid lightning. When they had first broken through the asteroid's crust 2 days ago, the crystal had been dormant, looking like nothing more than an unusual mineral formation. Then someone had accidentally dropped a power cell near it. The crystal had absorbed the energy instantly, then released it back, multiplied by a factor of 50. The blast had destroyed half their drilling equipment and sent energy readings spiking across every sensor on the station. The readings are consistent, Yuki reported, her voice tight with excitement and fear. Energy input of 100 units produces an output of 5,000 units. The amplification factor appears to be stable. Jin activated his communication link to Earth Command. The quantum relay would carry his message across the light years instantly, one of the few pieces of truly advanced technology that humans had managed to reverse engineer from captured alien equipment. Earth Command, this is Mining Station 7. He spoke carefully, knowing that alien intelligence services might be monitoring their communications. We have discovered an unusual mineral formation that requires immediate scientific study. Request priority transport for samples. The response came back within minutes. Understood. Station 7. Priority transport dispatched. Maintain security protocols. Security protocols meant that Jin couldn't say what he really wanted to say over open channels. He couldn't explain that they had just found the key to making human weapons infinitely more dangerous. The aliens had been using exotic matter crystals for thousands of years, but they had always used them to power their energy-based weapons. No one had ever thought to combine them with kinetic projectiles. 3 weeks later, Colonel Yun Sato stood in the testing facility buried deep beneath Luna's surface. The chamber was built to contain explosions that could level mountains, its walls lined with the strongest materials that human science could produce. She watched through reinforced viewing windows as technicians loaded what looked like an ordinary tungsten rod into a magnetic railgun. The rod was 20 centimeters long and weighed exactly 2 kilograms. It was made from the same dense metal that humans had been using for armor-piercing rounds for decades. The only difference was the crystal matrix embedded in its core, a lattice of exotic matter that had been grown in zero-gravity laboratories using samples from Jin's discovery. All personnel to safe positions, announced the facility's AI system. Test firing in 60 seconds. Yoon had seen thousands of weapons tests during her 20-year military career. She had watched railguns fire tungsten rods at velocities that could punch through tank armor like paper. She had seen missile strikes that could flatten city blocks. But nothing had prepared her for what she was about to witness. 30 seconds to firing. The railgun's magnetic coils began to charge, creating a humming sound that grew steadily louder. The tungsten rod sat motionless in the chamber, its crystal core beginning to glow with the same purple-white light they had seen in the asteroid. 10 seconds, Yoon found herself holding her breath. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, firing. The tungsten rod left the barrel at a significant fraction of light speed. As it flew through the test chamber, its crystal core began resonating. With exotic matter particles that existed in dimensions beyond normal spacetime, the rod became something more than simple metal. Something that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. The target was a decommissioned hegemony cruiser that had been donated to Earth for testing purposes. The alien ship was 3 kilometers long and protected by armor that could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons. Its quantum shields were still partially functional, creating a barrier of twisted spacetime around the hull. The tungsten rod hit the cruiser's shields and passed through them like they weren't there. It struck the hull and kept going. Its exotic matter core, destabilizing the molecular bonds that held the ship together. What happened next wasn't an explosion in any conventional sense. The cruisers simply ceased to exist. Every atom in the massive ship was converted to pure energy in a cascade reaction that lasted exactly 2.3 seconds. The flash was visible across 3 star systems, and the energy release registered on sensors as far away as the Galactic Council chambers. In the testing facility, alarms began screaming as radiation detectors went crazy. Yoon stared at the empty space where a 3-kilometer warship had existed moments before. Her hands were shaking as she activated her communication device. "This is Colonel Sato," she said, her voice barely steady. "Test successful. The target has been completely neutralized." On Earth, Dr. Hannah Kim received the test results in her new office as Director of Xenotechnology Integration. She had been promoted after her performance at the Galactic Council, and now she oversaw all projects involving alien technology. The data was both thrilling and terrifying. Humanity had just learned to weaponize the fundamental forces of reality itself. They had taken their instinct for kinetic warfare and combined it with alien science in ways that no other species had ever imagined. The beautiful part was that the aliens would never see it coming. They were still focused on their energy weapons and quantum shields, technologies that were completely useless against projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions. They had spent thousands of years perfecting ways to fight each other, never considering that someone might take a completely different approach. Hannah looked out her window at the construction sites scattered across Earth's surface. Human engineers were working around the clock, building new weapons, new ships, new technologies that combined the best of human ingenuity with alien science. The Galactic Council thought they knew what humans were capable of. They had seen the primitive kinetic weapons and chemical rockets and assumed that was all humanity would ever achieve. They had no idea that those same primitive weapons were about to become capable of unmaking stars. The hegemony invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's outer colonies like a swarm of metallic locusts. 200 ships filled the space around the agricultural world of New Kyoto, their hulls gleaming with the arrogant confidence of predators approaching helpless prey. Admiral Kethver stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the human colony through the main viewing screen. The planet looked peaceful and defenseless, its orbital platforms showing no military installations of any significance. Intelligence reports had confirmed what everyone already knew. Humans were still using primitive technology that posed no threat to hegemony forces. "Begin standard intimidation protocol," Kethver ordered, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone performing a routine task. The Admiral had conducted dozens of similar operations during his long career. Most species surrendered immediately when faced with overwhelming force. Those that didn't learned painful lessons about the cost of defying the hegemony. His tactical officer, a young female with bright silver markings across her face, looked up from her console with surprise. "Admiral, we're detecting human ships approaching our position." Kethver moved to the tactical display, expecting to see a desperate evacuation fleet or perhaps a few patrol boats trying to buy time for civilians to escape. What he saw made him pause in confusion. 8 ships were approaching his fleet, 8 vessels against 200. "Are they insane?" asked his weapons officer, a grizzled veteran who had served in the Vorthok Wars. "Do they think 8 ships can challenge our entire battle group?" The human ships looked exactly like the intelligence reports had described. Crude, industrial designs that resembled floating metal boxes more than proper warships. Their hulls were thick and heavily armored, painted in dull gray colors that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. They had no elegant curves or artistic flourishes like proper military vessels. They looked like something built in a factory rather than crafted by artists. "Magnify the lead vessel," Kethver ordered. The screen zoomed in on the largest human ship, designated UES Defiance according to their communication broadcasts. It was 800 meters long and looked like someone had stretched a metal cylinder and stuck weapons all over it. Magnetic railguns protruded from its hull like the spines of some primitive sea creature. Chemical rocket engines glowed orange at its stern, pushing the ship forward with visible flames and exhaust. "Look at those weapons," the tactical officer said with barely contained laughter. "Kinetic projectiles. They're going to throw rocks at us." Admiral Tae Choi stood on the bridge of the Defiance, his calm expression hiding the intense focus he felt as he watched the hegemony fleet arrange itself in a traditional battle formation. The alien ships were beautiful in their own way, with smooth curves and energy fields that made them look like living creatures rather than machines. Tae had studied every piece of intelligence Earth possessed about hegemony military doctrine. Their ships were designed for energy warfare, with plasma cannons that could vaporize mountains and quantum torpedoes that could crack moons. Their shields were specifically engineered to deflect energy-based attacks, creating barriers of twisted spacetime that redirected incoming fire. What they had never encountered was a weapon that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. All ships, this is Admiral Choi. He spoke into his communication system, his voice reaching the 7 other human vessels spread out in loose formation. Today we're not just defending a colony. We're announcing to the galaxy that humanity has arrived as a major power. Remember your training, trust your equipment, make every shot count. The hegemony fleet completed its formation and began advancing. 200 ships moving in perfect coordination. Their energy weapons charging with visible displays of power that were meant to intimidate enemies into surrender. Weapons free, Tay ordered. The first salvo from the human fleet looked disappointingly ordinary to the hegemony observers. 8 ships fired their railguns, launching what appeared to be simple metal projectiles at velocities that were impressive but not threatening to ships protected by quantum shields. The tungsten rods flew through space, their crystal cores beginning to resonate as they approached the alien fleet. What the hegemony sensors couldn't detect was the exotic matter matrix embedded within each projectile, or the way those matrices were interacting with dimensions. Beyond normal spacetime, the first rod struck the shields of a hegemony cruiser, and passed through them like they didn't exist. The quantum barriers that had never been breached by any known weapon offered no resistance to a projectile that was partially existing in parallel dimensions. The rod hit the cruiser's hull, and the ship simply vanished. One moment it was there, a kilometer-long vessel housing 3,000 crew members. The next moment there was only expanding energy and debris. The ship's matter converted to pure radiation in a cascade reaction that lasted less than 3 seconds. 7 more hegemony ships disappeared in identical flashes of light. Chaos erupted across the hegemony fleet's communication channels. Ship captains screamed reports that made no sense. Weapons that passed through shields, kinetic projectiles that caused matter conversion reactions. Ships destroyed by primitive human technology. Impossible, Kethfer whispered, staring at the tactical display where 8 red dots had simply vanished. Run full scans on those projectiles. Find out what they're doing. But there was no time for analysis. The human ships were reloading, their railguns cycling with mechanical precision. Another salvo launched, then another. Each shot found its target with terrifying accuracy, guided by quantum targeting systems that the aliens had never detected. The battle lasted exactly 17 minutes. When the last hegemony vessel was reduced to expanding plasma, Admiral Kethfer found himself aboard a human ship, sitting in what appeared to be a crude metal chair in a room lit by simple fluorescent bulbs. The humans who had captured him looked ordinary, wearing plain military uniforms without any of the ceremonial decorations favored by other species. Dr. Hannah Kim entered the room wearing the insignia of Earth's First Contact Division. She looked at the captured alien admiral with the same calm expression she had worn in the Galactic Council chambers 2 years earlier. Your technology, Kethfer said, his voice barely above a whisper. It shouldn't be possible. Kinetic weapons cannot penetrate quantum shields. Matter conversion requires massive energy expenditure. How are you doing this? Hannah sat down across from him, her hands folded calmly on the table. You made the same mistake the Galactic Council made, she said in perfect hegemony language, her words carefully chosen for maximum impact. You looked at our weapons and saw primitive metal projectiles. You never asked why we chose kinetic weapons over energy beams. You never wondered what we might do when we combined our approach with your technology. The alien admiral stared at her with 4 eyes that showed a mixture of fear and fascination. But the energy requirements alone, are handled by exotic matter matrices that your people discovered but never properly utilized. Hannah continued, you used those crystals to power energy weapons. We used them to make simple tungsten rods capable of existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Kethfer was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. You've been preparing for this for 2 years, Hannah confirmed. Ever since your council dismissed us as harmless primitives, you gave us time to study your technology, to understand your weaknesses, to develop countermeasures that you never saw coming. She leaned forward slightly, her expression still calm, but her eyes showing a hint of steel underneath. You never feared our past strength because you understood it. You should have feared our future strength because you couldn't imagine it. The news traveled faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every inhabited system in the galaxy. In less than 6 hours, every species in known space had heard the impossible report. The entire hegemony, Second Fleet, had been destroyed by 8 human ships. The Galactic Council chambers erupted in chaos unlike anything seen in 3 centuries. Representatives who had never bothered to learn Earth's location suddenly demanded immediate briefings on human military capabilities. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive now found themselves studying grainy surveillance footage of the battle, trying to understand how tungsten rods could make starships simply vanish. Ambassador Vextel stood at his crystal podium, his forearms trembling as he addressed the emergency session. The same being who had laughed at human technology 2 years earlier now looked genuinely terrified. The destruction was total, he reported, his voice cracking through the translation. System, 200 vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts and 15 heavy cruisers. Gone in 17 minutes. Our most advanced shields were useless. Our armor might as well have been paper. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of translation devices. Representatives from dozens of worlds processed information that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare and technology. Dr. Hannah Kim entered the chamber through the main doors, walking slowly down the central aisle toward the human delegations section. But something had changed since her last appearance here. Gone was the quiet observer who had sat in the corner taking notes. The woman who now approached the speaker's podium carried herself with the confidence of someone who understood exactly how much power her species wielded. She wore the same simple black suit, but now it bore the insignia of Earth's First Contact Division. More importantly, she moved like someone who knew that every eye in the chamber was tracking her movements, and she was completely comfortable with that attention. Honored representatives, Hannah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chambers. Acoustics. I believe you requested this emergency session to discuss recent events in the Kepler 442 system. Commander Zilthak, the Vorthok representative whose tentacles had writhed with laughter during humanity's first evaluation, now kept his appendages perfectly still. His wet, bubbling voice was carefully controlled when he spoke. Dr. Kim, we demand immediate explanation of the weapons used against hegemony forces. The destruction patterns are unlike anything in our databases. Our scientists believe your species has developed some form of exotic matter, weaponry. Hannah smiled, an expression that didn't reach her eyes. Your scientists are partially correct. We have indeed learned to use exotic matter. The crystals your people discovered thousands of years ago, the same crystals you've been using to power energy weapons, she gestured, and holographic displays filled the air above the chamber. The images showed human ships in action, their railguns launching projectiles that seemed to phase through energy shields like they weren't there. The difference, Hannah continued, is that we didn't try to copy your approach. While you perfected energy weapons, we perfected making simple things work in impossible ways. The Kiroth delegate, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics that indicated extreme agitation, spoke in musical tones that conveyed barely controlled fear. You have destabilized the entire balance of galactic power. The hegemony controlled 7 sectors. Their absence will create chaos. The hegemony controlled 7 sectors through intimidation and superior firepower. Hannah corrected. They maintained order by threatening to destroy anyone who opposed them. If their absence creates chaos, perhaps the system they built was fundamentally flawed. More holographic images appeared, showing human colonies expanding into space that had been abandoned by hegemony forces. Mining ships extracting resources from asteroids that had been off-limits for centuries. Trade convoys traveling routes that had required hegemony permission for decades. This expansion must cease immediately, declared Ambassador Krell, though his usual bluster seemed hollow now. His massive form pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that Hannah had learned indicated stress among his species. The destabilization of established territories cannot be tolerated by the galactic community. Hannah's smile grew colder. The same established territories where human traders have been taxed at rates triple those applied to other species. Where human colony ships have been turned away from systems with abundant unclaimed worlds. Where human diplomatic communications have been ignored for decades. She walked closer to the center of the chamber, her voice rising slightly to ensure every being present could hear her clearly. Let me be very clear about something. Humanity's expansion isn't random aggression. It's the systematic correction of centuries of discriminatory treatment by species who assumed we would always remain technologically inferior. The truth was becoming undeniable to everyone in the chamber. The humans weren't conquering territory for conquest's sake. They were claiming space and resources that should have been available to them all along, if they had been treated as equals rather than primitives. What do you want? Asked the Kiroth delegate, her musical voice now carrying notes. That sounded like breaking glass. What we've always wanted, Hannah replied, her voice calm but carrying undertones of absolute determination. Equality, respect, fair treatment in trade negotiations. Access to the same territories available to other species. And the understanding that Earth's children will never again be dismissed as primitive, simply because we choose different paths to achieve the same goals. The silence that followed was complete. Even the translation devices seemed to pause as the implications of her words sank in. Vextel was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. And if we refuse these demands, Hannah turned to look at him directly, her dark eyes meeting his 4 crystal ones. Then you'll discover what other innovations human engineers have developed during the 2 years you gave us to prepare. The exotic matter railguns are just the beginning. She gestured again, and new images appeared. Human ships under construction in orbital shipyards. Weapons testing facilities on dozens of worlds. Research stations studying alien technology that had been acquired through methods the Council probably didn't want to know about. We didn't want to become a military power, Hannah continued. We wanted to be explorers, scientists, traders, but you forced us to become something else when you treated us as second-class citizens in our own galaxy. The vote was called 30 minutes later. Full Galactic Council membership for humanity, with all the rights and privileges that entailed. Equal representation in all trade negotiations. Access to previously restricted territories. An end to discriminatory taxation and regulations. The vote was unanimous. Not because the council members suddenly respected humanity, but because they understood the alternative. As the session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, many of them cast nervous glances at the human delegation. The species they had dismissed as harmless primitives had just rewritten the rules of galactic civilization in less than 3 years. Hannah remained seated until the chamber was nearly empty, just as she had 2 years earlier. But this time, she wasn't taking notes on how others reacted to humanity. This time, others were taking notes on how humanity reacted to them. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about underestimating humans. The question now was whether they would remember it long enough to avoid making the same mistake again. 5 years had passed since the Battle of the Outer Colonies, and the galaxy had settled into a new rhythm. The massive space station that orbited between 3 star systems served as a symbol of this change. Its rotating sections, housing diplomats, traders, and scientists from 47 different worlds. Ambassador Hannah Kim stood in her office on the station's central hub, looking through the transparent aluminum windows at the docking arms that stretched out like the spokes of a great wheel. Ships from dozens of species were moored to the station's ports. But they weren't just here for the usual diplomatic meetings and trade negotiations that had dominated galactic politics for centuries. They were here to learn. The largest docking bay held a Vorthok bioship that had been modified with human kinetic weapon systems. The living vessel's purple flesh now contained magnetic railguns that could fire exotic matter projectiles, combining the best of both species' technologies. Captain Zilmora, the ship's symbiotic pilot, had spent 6 months working with human engineers to perfect the integration. In the next bay, a Kairoth Harmony-class destroyer was undergoing similar modifications. The crystalline beings had discovered that their sonic weapons could be dramatically enhanced by incorporating human-designed exotic matter resonators. The musical tones that had once been merely beautiful were now capable of disrupting molecular bonds across multiple dimensions. Even the hegemony had returned, but as partners rather than conquerors. Their elegant ships now patrolled trade routes alongside human vessels, their crews working together to maintain peace in regions that had been plagued by piracy for decades. Dr. Min Park walked into Hannah's office carrying a datapad filled with the day's reports. He had been promoted from mining engineer to director of technology exchange after his discovery of the exotic matter crystals had changed everything. His weathered face showed satisfaction as he reviewed the latest numbers. Production is up 30% across all participating worlds, he reported. The Andorian Republic finished their first hybrid destroyer last week. The Centauri Collective wants to license our targeting systems for their defense platforms, and the Rigel Consortium is offering to share their gravity manipulation technology. In exchange for exotic matter production techniques, Hannah nodded, but her attention was focused on a small ship approaching the station's main docking bay. It was clearly alien in design, with smooth curves and an opalescent hull that shifted colors as it moved. The ship was broadcasting first contact protocols in a language that the station's computers didn't recognize. "Looks like we have visitors," she said, pointing toward the approaching vessel. Min checked his datapad and grinned. The Zephyrian Federation. They just achieved faster-than-light travel 6 months ago. This is their first contact with galactic civilization. Hannah straightened her uniform and prepared to meet the newcomers. This had become a regular occurrence over the past few years, as word of the new galactic order spread to species that had previously been isolated in distant star systems. Each time, the same pattern repeated itself. The new species would arrive with expectations based on old information. They would expect to meet the traditional galactic powers, the arrogant hegemony, the mysterious Kuroth, the aggressive Vorth. They would prepare for the usual intimidation tactics and demands for tribute that had characterized first contact scenarios for millennia. Instead, they would meet humans. An hour later, Hannah sat across from Ambassador Tissera of the Federation in the station's main conference room. The alien diplomat was humanoid in basic shape but covered in scales that shifted from blue to green, depending on her emotional state. Currently, they were showing confused patterns of yellow and orange. "I apologize for my confusion," Tissera said through her translator, her voice carrying musical undertones. "But our intelligence services indicated that this sector was controlled by the Hegemony Empire. We prepared for very different negotiations." "The hegemony is still a major power," Hannah explained patiently. But galactic politics have changed significantly in recent years. Rather than one species dominating others, we now have a cooperative alliance where each member contributes their unique strengths. She gestured to the viewing screen, which showed ships from various species working together to construct a new trading platform in the system's asteroid belt. Human engineers operated alongside Kyroth artisans and Vorthok biotechnicians, their different approaches to problem solving creating solutions that no single species could have achieved alone. What do you require from us? Tessera asked, her scales shifting to nervous purple patterns. Tribute payments, resource extraction rights, military service. Knowledge, Hannah replied simply. What can your people teach us? What problems have you solved that we haven't encountered yet? What technologies have you developed that might complement our existing capabilities? The Zephyrian ambassador's scales brightened to surprised silver. You want to learn from us. But we are primitive compared to galactic civilization. We just invented faster-than-light travel. Our weapons are basic energy projectors. Our ships use simple fusion reactors. Hannah smiled, remembering similar conversations from years past. 5 years ago, humans were considered primitive too. We had kinetic weapons and chemical rockets. The Galactic Council classified us as a minimal threat and expected us to remain minor players forever. She called up a holographic display showing the battle where 8 human ships had destroyed 200 hegemony vessels. What they didn't understand is that being different doesn't mean being inferior. Sometimes the primitive approach is actually the superior one, once you understand how to apply it properly. Tessera's scales cycled through patterns of amazement and growing excitement. You mean our technologies might actually be valuable? That's exactly what I mean, Hannah confirmed. The Kyroth thought their harmonic weapons were outdated until we showed them how to enhance them with exotic matter. The Vorthok believed their bioships were obsolete until we helped them integrate kinetic systems. Every species brings something unique to the table. Over the next several hours, Hannah walked Tessera through the station's research facilities. They visited laboratories where human scientists worked alongside alien colleagues, pushing the boundaries of physics and engineering in ways that no single species could have achieved alone. In one lab, researchers were developing new forms of faster-than-light communication by combining human quantum mechanics with Kyroth harmonic resonance. In another, engineers were creating hybrid power systems that merged human exotic matter techniques with Vorthok biological energy conversion. The old way was about dominance, Hannah explained as they toured the facilities. Stronger species conquered weaker ones, forcing them to adopt superior technologies and abandoning their own innovations. But that approach wasted incredible potential. They paused at an observation window overlooking the station's main assembly bay, where teams from 6 different species were collaborating on a new type of exploration vessel. The ship combined human kinetic systems, Kyroth harmonic shields, Vorthok biomechanical healing capabilities, and technologies from 3 other species. This is the new paradigm, Hannah continued. Not replacement, but integration. Not conquest, but cooperation. Not dominance, but mutual respect. Tessera's scales had settled into steady patterns of deep blue and gold, colors that Hannah had learned indicated contentment and hope among her species. And humanity leads this alliance. Humanity participates in this alliance, Hannah corrected gently. We don't lead it because no one leads it. We all contribute what we can and benefit from what others provide. As they returned to the conference room to begin formal negotiations, Hannah reflected on how much had changed since her first appearance before the Galactic Council. Back then, she had been trying to prove that humans deserved respect. Now, she was helping other species understand that they deserved respect. The galaxy was learning that diversity wasn't a weakness to be eliminated, but a strength to be cultivated. And humanity, the species that had once been dismissed as primitive, had become the catalyst for that transformation.